Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Vintage Spotlight. And boy, Leighton, has it been a minute or a month or what? It is good to be back. How are you?
I'm happy to be back here and excited for today's show.
As am I. We have a great guest today, Jonathan, Sports Cards and Sunsets on Instagram. We got a bunch of stuff to get through. We're going to have a bit of a Mickey Mantle themed episode, as you may have guessed from the featured card on the thumbnail. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome to all listeners on Spotify, Apple, wherever you do get your podcast. This show is available wherever you listen to your podcast, and of course on YouTube as well. Leighton, I think we need to jump right into this because we have a lot to get through, and we want to keep this as short as we can for our loyal listeners and viewers who we are very grateful for. So let's start by bringing out our guest for tonight's episode. Today's episode, by the way, we are recording this on Tuesday, October the 22nd. We intend to release this today or tomorrow. Let's bring out Jonathan, Sports Cards and Sunsets. Jonathan, welcome to the Vintage Spotlight podcast. We are thrilled to have you. How are you today?
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me on. Thrilled to be here. I am one of those loyal listeners you just mentioned. I listen to you guys on Spotify every episode and really excited to be here.
Well, we're grateful for that. And let's shout out your podcast as well, the Rough Cuts podcast. Our last guest we had on was Nate in Cardboard Veritas, is one of your partners on the Rough Cuts podcast. And then, of course, you also have Matthew, 1956 Tops guy, who we have him on our high up on our target list for an upcoming guest as well. So is there anything, I want to give you just a moment to let everybody know a little bit about maybe yourself, your approach to collecting and the podcast.
Yeah, well, Nate was a wonderful guest and Matthew would be as well. Those were two of the first friends I made in the hobby when I jumped back in and got into Instagram. And it's been, I would say the friendships are probably even more important to me today than the cards are. But that's the great thing about the collecting community is you see people that like what you like, or you have some overlap, and then you start to inspire people. I met those guys at shows. I met Nate in Atlantic City a couple years back, met Matthew in person for the first time at the Chicago National a few years ago. And now they're buddies that we get together every few weeks, maybe every month. And we just talk cards. It's really about the love of the cards and the community. We're small. We just put a new episode up on Apple and Spotify yesterday, I think. And we're going to keep doing it, hopefully as long as we're in the hobby. And other content creators like you guys inspire us of new things to talk about. So that's the fun thing is there's this virtuous cycle. And I think we all kind of inspire each other in the hobby.
It's really a privilege to be referred to as someone who inspires what you guys are doing. So that's really cool to hear. Make sure you guys listening, watching, check out the Rough Cuts podcast. And of course, follow Jonathan at sportscards.and.sunsets as you see on your screen. Leighton, let's get into the first item on our agenda where we like to look at some key sales from auction houses. And you have curated a couple of items right here. I'm going to bring them up. Would you like to look at the card first or the ball?
Let's do the card first.
All right.
And for those that are maybe just joining the Vintage Spotlight for the first time, first, thank you, Jonathan, of course, for joining us for today's episode. And second, the reason why we like to start off our Vintage Spotlight episodes with some auction news is because it really sets kind of the framework for the entire episode. In this case, this episode just happens to be that the Yankees are in the World Series for the first time in 15 years. But it's not the reason why we chose to discuss Mickey Mantle today. The reason why we chose to discuss Mantle is because Heritage Auctions, you can find them at ha.com. They recently concluded an auction just a few weeks ago where, as usual, Jonathan and Jeremy, I know you both know this, they had a lot of, you guessed it, Mickey Mantle cards and memorabilia for sale. But there was a few particular sales that really stuck out to me. And one of them, which we're going to start off with, is the 1959 Topps Mickey Mantle PSA 9. Now, we'll start off with the sales price, which was a hefty $300,000 in a PSA 9. So a few points of reference for that. So number one, in the very same auction, a PSA 8 version of that card sold for $15,000. So a 20 times multiple for the 9. Keep in mind, although the 9 is difficult, It is a Pop 27. So it's not the rarest card to find in a 9, it's just difficult. What I thought was really interesting is the card sold the November of last year, actually in Heritage, for about $117,000. And then the year before, in the December timeframe of 2022, in Memory Lane, it sold for about $83,000 in PSA 9. So, of course, you know, I have my own thinking as to why this card in particular sold for what it did. But I'd love to hear from both you, Jonathan, who were kind enough to join us today, as well as you, Jeremy. I mean, like, this price is beyond healthy to me. It almost seems kind of nutty. What are your guys' thoughts?
I'm going to let you go first, Jonathan.
Yeah, it certainly is nutty. I think it's a great example of how Mickey Mantle represents something in the hobby bigger than just who he was as a player. And I know we'll get more into that. But when I look at this particular example, a couple things jump out at me. We've seen, you know, this eye appeal movement where not all cards in the same grade are considered equal. So we look a lot at the brightness, the clarity of the image, particularly on this one, the centering jumps out at me. But there's something else I think is at play. And we've seen in recent years a real premium on the newer graded example. And when I look at that, the number on the cert, I see it starts with a 9. We're all wondering what's going to happen when PSA runs out of digits and what are they going to do then. But this looks like it was probably graded within the last couple of months. And when we look back at examples, we say, you know, not all grades are alike. And there were perhaps examples that were graded 20 years ago that maybe have deteriorated since they've been encapsulated, or maybe the standards were different. But when I look at this one, wow, it's hard to take exception to the grade. I imagine there was quite a celebration by the submitter when they got that result back, which looks deserving. But I think the recency of the slab, the fact that it was just graded, differentiates it from some of those other sales you mentioned. And wow, what a healthy market for Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, well said. And, you know, the reason why I let you go first there, Jonathan, is because I'm going to throw a wrinkle into this that I wasn't expecting to throw, and I need to get everyone's thoughts before I share what that is. I will, you know, I have the same sentiments you guys do. $300,000, lots of money for the PSA 9. I think you said, Leighton, there was a population of in the 20s, 27, which is not the rarest of all cards. And if you were to look at every card that has ever sold for, say, $250,000 plus, which of those cards have the highest and the lowest population? I think we'd expect there to be many low pop numbers in there. Is this the highest pop card to, you know, vintage card to ever sell? You know, and even at the mint, you know, we talk about gem rate a lot. You hear that, but there's also the mint rate or the mint plus rate. I wonder about those things. But the wrinkle I'm going to throw in this, and I don't know what to make of this, guys, is I wanted to understand the full population, not just the Pop 9, but the 10s and how many total cards there were. So I took that cert number and I put it into the PSA app. I'm getting invalid cert number. So then I went and it says try scanning. So I click on the try scanning and I put it up against my other monitor here. You guys can't see me doing this, but I do that. And it comes back again with invalid cert number. So that's interesting. I don't know when it became invalid or if it's a glitch in the PSA system. But I mean, and I know this is out of left field. Neither of you were expecting that. Leighton, what do you make of that here today?
Well, that's certainly a curveball. But the first thing I would say is, believe it or not, PSA isn't perfect and they make mistakes. So recently, I'm bringing this up only because you're sharing this, which just happened, looking up the cert of this. We had a woman come into our offices in our store in New Jersey with a 1952 Topps Willie Mays PSA 3. Price was already agreed upon. We were set. And all we have to do is really just verify the holder, as you guys could both imagine, you know, whether it be just see if it's cracked. In some cases, we put the cert, you know, into the PSA database to just make sure it's actually active and good. And so the card came in, and you wouldn't believe it. It's not the card she texted us. And yet she explained to us, she showed us, she took screenshots. When PSA initially had the card in, they had the right scan. When they did an update, they had a different 1952 Topps Willie Mays in there that showed that it was well-centered. And she's not claiming that was her card. When she brought it into our offices, that card was very askew, very off-centered, left to right, and we were not able to reach a deal because obviously, as you were alluding to, Jonathan, not every grade of 9, not every grade of 3 is created equal. And so if I had to guess, Jeremy, just throwing it out there, with the healthy prices just received, I do believe it's a glitch or a mistake, but of course I could be wrong. It wouldn't be the first or the last mistake that we've seen a grading company make, especially when it comes to technology.
This feels like something that might need to be a follow-up item in a future episode for you. There's a bit of a mystery you've uncovered, and now I'm curious.
And you know, one of the things that goes through my mind here, Leighton, as you explain that Willie Mays situation, and we think about the fact that yes, PSA isn't perfect. They're churning out 1 million cards a month. There are going to be mistakes here and there, and I think we can accept that as a hobby. Then I think about the auction house Heritage, one of the finest in the space, for, you know, with a great pedigree and certainly lasting power. I wonder, do auction houses verify the cert on all the cards that make it into their catalogs before those catalogs go to print or go live? And if they were to have discovered this, would they have pulled it or asked questions? I have to think the answer to that is yes.
100%, Jeremy.
Yeah, any responsible auction house is going to do that diligence because they don't want to run into issues. So my thoughts are either it is a mistake on PSA's part in the database, or something did happen. Something might have been discovered post-auction to cause PSA to decertify this card. We don't know what that is. We would love to follow up, and hopefully we'll be able to follow up in a future episode with the answer to this. I think that would be great.
I'll throw out one theory that's maybe would be less nefarious than what people might be thinking. Perhaps the purchaser of the card cracked it out and sent it to SGC and said, hey, I think this is better than a 9. I think it might be a 10. And maybe we'll see it pop up on social media and a new holder. So
Jonathan, I like your style.
No, but he's right. That is a plausible explanation as well.
Listen, it's a dead nut centered 9. There's only a pop 1 of a PSA 10, so I can't imagine there's many in a Gem Mint SGC holder. I know we're going to largely spend the time on just 1 or 2 Mantle items, but I did want to say I dove into the Mantle component of the Heritage auction just a little bit more. And before we get to the signed baseball, what do you think about this, Jonathan and Jeremy? They had a 1957 Topps PSA 9 Mantle, which is a pop 22 and is also notoriously known, Jonathan, as you collect Mantle, is not an easy 9. In fact, the Mantle 59, even though there's only a few more examples, it's just a much easier card to find in high grade. There's also only one higher. In the same auction, that card only realized $156,000 at auction. So literally about half of what this example realized. And so lots of interesting questions to ask. Jeremy, of course, with the curveball after trying to verify the cert, not knowing what the scoop is, we will, of course, let our Vintage Spotlight audience know what we uncover as we find some answers.
All right. Interesting. I'm sorry to spring that upon both of you, but that's part of the situation.
Nothing to be sorry about. I think it's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Let's go on to the other item that you found interesting, Leighton. And here we have an autographed Mickey Mantle baseball, last home run baseball at an old timers game, signed by him and Whitey Ford. Sells for $18,600. And beautiful autograph, right in the sweet spot here with some sort of I don't know what this is, but that might not be Mickey Mantle's writing down there. Leighton, why don't you tell us about this item?
So as I was going through my research, just using the keyword Mickey Mantle in the last Heritage auction that just took place, this result stood out to me for so many reasons. So, I've been following auctions and auction houses for a few decades now. And this is a healthy price for so many reasons. So number one, even if this is technically Mantle's last home run baseball, it's not counted. It's like saying if you hit a home run in the backyard of your house. We used to call my stadium Sheldon Stadium. Wouldn't count for the stats. And so this certainly doesn't count towards his stats. Second of all, an old timers game is not the same thing as a Major League Baseball game in terms of like if you have a game used artifact, it's just not accepted as the same thing. And I've seen, I don't have anything for today's episode prepared, but I feel like I've seen, Babe Ruth, game used baseballs from a game that he played in. And, even in, I think it was, I was just bidding in Leland's the other day, and it was when he was a Boston Brave. it only sold for like $1,000 or $1,500. Now, it wasn't a home run ball. My point is, this seemed like a very healthy price, one in which, once again, to what Jonathan was alluding to earlier, if this is not someone named Mickey Mantle, I'm not sure that there's really almost anyone else in the world, including Michael Jordan, where an old timers day home run ball could sell, even with autographs on it, for $18,000. What do you think, Jonathan?
There's something about Mantle. There's almost a mythology that surrounds him. And I think, yeah, it's highly interesting that this sold for this much, because he signed baseballs all the time. Baseballs signed by Mickey Mantle beautifully, right in the sweet spot like that, are not rare. But I think there's something about his story that intrigues people, and this feels like a unique item. And I also think it's maybe a sign that there's still so many new people flooding in the collector zone that are taking an interest in Mantle. People that never watched him play. I myself never watched him play. And this is it's really interesting to see something from him goofing around with his friends, essentially, as a retired player, sell for this amount.
It's an interesting piece. I think the fact that it says last home run baseball right there, even though it's an old timers game, if this is the last time that he hit a home run, whether it's major leagues or a Legends game, that's still pretty significant. Especially if it was a sanctioned old timers game, that was endorsed by the MLB. I think that makes it significant that way. And it is a nice looking piece. So very, very interesting. Leighton, there were also a handful of 1952 Topps Mickey Mantles in the auction. I believe you had said there were about 6 of them.
There were.
And, the 52 Topps Mantle, in my opinion, is the most iconic card in the hobby. Even more so than the Honus Wagner, maybe just because so many more people can own it and can actually covet it realistically, even though it is very expensive, even in low grade, even with a chunk missing. Like we saw one last night sell on MC Sports Cards on eBay, had the bottom right corner literally missing about 5% of the card, and it still sold for close to like a hair under $20,000. The fact that it is such a common card, yet is held in such high regard and sells for so much money, it must send a signal out there that there is an appetite for the 52 Topps Mickey Mantle, that it doesn't seem to be able. No, we cannot satiate that demand. Jonathan, I'll put it over to you because you own a copy. What does it mean to you that these cards continue to get gobbled up at amounts that are, out of reach for most collectors, but yet the demand is there and they are being consumed over and over and over again, 6 in one night, as Leighton had pointed out earlier?
Yeah, there's something about that card that's symbolic. I think it's actually bigger than baseball. I think it has an inherent beauty in it. I think the card itself even has, I'll go back to that word mythology. There's a mythology around the card, and it being in the later series where apparently Topps had viewed the 52 set as a failure and dumped boxes of it in the Hudson River. Now, I don't think we'll ever know if the story is true, but I think it helps. And a lot of people look at that card as the ultimate destination of something to own, as, if you have the collector bug, there's something about it. I'll share mine. I mean, that's certainly how I viewed it. I covered up the grade because the grade doesn't matter. It is a low grade copy.
Beautiful.
And as I grew up and entered the workforce and someday had my first real job, the items that I most aspired to get were not a fancy car or a fancy home. They were actually collectibles. The very first, after I finished law school, was completing the original Garbage Pail Kid set from 1985.
Sure.
And once I had done that, my gaze moved to Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle was symbolic of the richness of baseball history, and if you had one of his cards, you were set. I mean, I remember finding a beater 1964 Mantle in my friend's father's closet, and we thought it was worth $1 million. Like that Mickey Mantle, even the name Mickey Mantle, there's something about it. And at some point in time, I realized this was just a card I needed to own, and I was very patient. And you know, I knew I couldn't afford anything other than a low grade copy. And once I found the one, I went all in. And at that point in time, it really wasn't about the value of the card or the value of the asset. I don't closely track it. I think of it more as something experiential. Like if I just had to go to the Super Bowl with my family to see my favorite team play, it's you might spend $20,000 on the trip and the tickets and the memories, and it has nothing to do with getting a return on that. It's all just about getting to experience what it's like to watch your favorite team in the Super Bowl. In my case, the experience of getting to own this card. The day after I bought it, I told my daughter it was hers. This is off the market. Nobody's ever going to buy it at auction in my lifetime. And I think it's the kind of card that the 52 Topps Mantle is, where a lot of people just to own one fulfills a deep, deep desire they've had for a very long time. And then it's off the market.
You know, Jonathan, those are very powerful words as a dad. Jeremy, you're a father. I don't quite say it as succinctly as you did, but I might take that moving forward, which is, this is not going to be up for auction in my lifetime. Very short, very concise, very powerful.
Yeah, the one thing I wouldn't do that Jonathan does is tell my daughter that this is her card. Not yet anyway, because she's only 7 and she might actually come in here one day and grab it, and then whoa, where'd the mantle go? But I echo what Leighton said. Really, really powerful, and the sign of a true, not just a true collector, because even that term itself has interesting connotations, but like a true passionate hobbyist who really loves these items, these objects. So I love to hear that. And thanks for showing your copy. Don't need to see the grade. Of course, I'm curious, but I don't really care. It's a beautiful, beautiful card. I love that it's low grade, because that just means that you probably got it at a bit of a discount for the eye appeal, or maybe hopefully you did at least. A wonderful, wonderful copy. But high grade mantles have been on fire, Leighton, in recent months, 8.5s and up in particular. And you have noticed this going on. What do you make of that?
So I think it's a little bit like Jonathan was alluding to. There is an aura, there is a mystique around Mantle, but make no mistake, that combined with a very powerful set registry or player registry on PSA, I believe those factors, along with a few others, meaning, you know, interest rates are coming down. At the very least, people are waiting for the next president to be elected to decide which way they're going to go with things. So I just think that right now is it's an ideal time to both be selling, because the prices are very healthy, as you can see by the few things that we showed off in the last Heritage auction. But also, as Jonathan's alluding to, you know, I'm not sure that they're poor choices, they're poor investments, because Mantle, as Jonathan's alluding to, he never saw him play. I never saw him play. I have a 52 Topps Mantle, may not be as nice as Jonathan's. So I think there's a number of factors that are combining to lead to the prices. But I would say I chose the grade of 8.5 for a reason. I'm not suggesting that in a grade of 8 or below, they're not desirable. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But I think that of the three of us here, if we've been looking, and even if it's informally tracking in auctions, I bid in enough auctions every single week, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. But when you start to get to that grade of about 8.5 and higher, which is super high grade, like I see a lot of 61 Topps Mickey Mantles in 8s, but I don't see really an 8.5 or a 9 sold very often. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, when I mentioned 8.5s have been particularly on fire lately, it was all mantles, not just the 52 Topps, which you did clarify. I just want to make sure it's super clear. And I think it is a function of a competitive PSA set registry, and Mickey Mantle likely being, and I haven't verified, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say likely the most popular of all player set registries. Maybe Michael Jordan competes with that over in basketball. So I think that there's certainly that. And then the grade of 8.5 is a very specific grade because, it's a hair under a 9, and 9s are, really rare and hard to find, and very expensive when you can find them, as we saw with the 59. So the 8.5, the 8 is maybe the collector grade for the 59 Topps Mantle, where the 9 is the, and I don't want to say investors aren't collectors, but that investor level where you really have to commit and consider what happens when you or your estate gets out of that card if you're laying out $300,000. And then 8.5 is right in the middle there. So I think you picked the perfect grade. But that's also what you noticed, that these cards are getting gobbled up by, I'm going to call them investors, because I think $250,000 and more is significant money for just about everybody. And so I think that there's some of that is at play there. And as you've both said, it is still Mickey Mantle. And I don't know what other players we are seeing that with once you get past maybe, and at different grade points, of course, because of a different vintage, but the Babe Ruths, the Jackie Robinsons, etc. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, if you look at PSA's grading guidelines, the .5, this isn't always consistently applied, but they say that they particularly take centering into account. So one thing the 8.5 tells me is that these are not only high grade examples, but likely beautiful high eye appeal examples. For the collectors these days, value centering more than corners. I think 30 years ago, perhaps the reverse was true, and pack fresh was more important than centering. The other thing that has made me chuckle, and I've noticed a lot, is the modern collectors that are really focused on stats and on-field performance and the way that ties to values of cards are often sort of perplexed by Mickey Mantle values. And I recently saw a post where one of them said, why is it that the 7th greatest baseball player of all time by their rankings, I don't know what measure they were looking at, is setting the highest prices? And I laughed to myself when I saw that, because my instinct was, really, 7th greatest? Is he that high? I instinctively would have actually, and I'm the guy who my most valuable physical asset other than my house is that card I just showed you. It's worth more than my car. And I thought, that's not what it's about. And I have a lot of thoughts on why Mickey Mantle. But it's not, and of course he was a great player and set some unbreakable records in baseball. But I think people are missing the boat when they just think it's about what he accomplished as a player that relates to his card values.
Yeah, there's so much more to a player's degree of love they receive by the hobby than their on-field, on-court, on-ice performance. There is the, how did they impact culture and society? Do they transcend the sport? Michael Jordan does, Babe Ruth does, Mickey Mantle, I believe, does as well. You're hard pressed to find anyone in North America who hasn't heard that name at this point. However, that could start to shift as the years and decades continue to go by, and we start to lose more and more people who did see him play and have that personal connection to him. And we still have a personal connection. By we, I mean our generation, because our fathers and grandfathers, we remember them telling us stories about Mickey Mantle, and a connection to Mantle might actually be a proxy for a connection to our grandparents, or vice versa. So there, I think there's always going to be, not always, but for many more years, people living with a connection to Mickey Mantle. However, I think there is also a lingering concern out there by a certain faction of the hobby, and I think it's something we should all be thinking about, which is, what does happen to the values of Mickey Mantle cards once we're all gone and those connections to our fathers, grandfathers evaporate because we're just no longer here? Are we going to pass that down to our kids and their kids? What is the long-term prospect on the values of even Mickey Mantle cards once everyone who saw him play and their close family have passed on? Do those values come down because there's less interest? We see it across all sorts of Hall of Famers where they kind of just fade away from the public conscience. And so I wonder, is Mickey Mantle a name that will be able to transcend that and survive that as time goes on because of his place in history? Leighton, what do you think?
It's a great question. And I think for many reasons, he's going to be remembered. I also believe there's some validity to what you're suggesting, but I think that we're all going to be long gone from the earth, and we'll have no way of knowing how it plays out. And so I think, to what we were all alluding to, his value isn't just about what he did on the field. Now, in the case, for example, of the Honus Wagner, it's similar, meaning the T206 Honus Wagner, but clearly there's some rarity at play. And so I think that it's a great question. I personally feel comfortable with the likes of Mickey Mantle in my collection holding a lot of value, because I don't think it's going to happen quickly, what you're suggesting. If it does happen, we will see over time, maybe, for example, I'm making this up, in 20 years, if Heritage has another 6 1952 Topps Mickey Mantles, you will start to see cracks in the pavement, which is a term I like to use in all facets of life. I don't think it's going to be a cliff and it's just going to fall right off. But I think we could literally have an entire show just debating this issue. And I don't want to take up the next 30 minutes just talking about this, but it's fascinating. And I think it goes deeper than Mickey Mantle.
Well, I'm going to just share my thought, and then we'll get some thoughts for you. My thought on this, guys, is that, and I'm with you, Leighton, I think Mickey Mantle is a legend, and I think he's an icon, and I think he is part of the fabric of baseball, meaning he's part of the fabric of Americana. So in my opinion, my theory is that in order for Mickey Mantle's cards to just lose value and not be interesting to the hobbyists however many decades down the road, I think baseball has to go away altogether from being America's pastime, because as long as baseball is being played in 30 stadiums across the United States and Toronto here in Canada, I think that the history is going to be respected, studied, appreciated, and valued. And Mickey Mantle will be a key part in that, maybe even more key than Honus Wagner is, save for the T206 and maybe a couple of others. Jonathan, what are your thoughts? And then we'll go on to our next segment.
You used a couple words that I really agree with. One was legend. I don't think we collect Mickey Mantle just because he was a baseball player, but it's kind of his status as a legend, and also Americana. I think there was a time when baseball history was American history. I think that time is already behind us for the most part. Think about when Jackie Robinson was coming into the league, which was around the time that Mantle played. So I think it's bigger than him. And the examples I go to are Shoeless Joe Jackson, Honus Wagner, Babe Ruth. They are now purely in legend status. It's like they said in Field of Dreams, legends never die. I think with time, Mantle's the aura around him can actually grow as he becomes further and further to the past and assumes that legendary status. And there was so much about him as a player that made him super collectible. One, he was replacing a legend, Joe DiMaggio. Who could be the great white hope, the Commerce Comet, to come to the Yankees and have to replace DiMaggio in center field and actually surpass expectations? He had a big personality for a big market team. And there's also something about legends that have this, I call it the what could have been factor. And, if he hadn't have gotten injured, what more could he have done, like Bobby or Shoeless Joe? So I think there's so much going for him, and that it's possible that over time the mystique actually goes up. And I agree with Leighton. It's also possible that as we get further from him, that there is less interest, and so we'll have to see how it plays out. But I have a lot of confidence that he's going to stay at the center of the hobby.
I wanted to add this great point, Jonathan. So, Jeremy, you said your daughter's 7. Jonathan, my son is 9. And we recently went to Cooperstown. And not that this is like the test But when we were in one of the many stores, clearly we were there mainly for me, not for him. But, you know, we tried to balance it. As we were looking around, one of the things that Crosby took to that he could connect with is the books that him and I have read together. So a really good buddy of mine, his name is Lou Blasi, and his son's a writer. So Lou is someone who's an announcer on Sirius. He has his own show about fantasy baseball. Very knowledgeable. So he sent me a few years ago a book about Jackie and me, Babe and me, and there's this just wonderful baseball children's book series. And so my point is, well beyond just the play in the field, when we were in the store, now granted, we did, I bought my son a Jackie Robinson, call it like a pseudo jersey type t-shirt, but he never saw him play. He learned about him briefly in school. He learns about him from his daddy. We've read about him in now a couple books. I think, as Jeremy was alluding to, I believe baseball is not going to be going anywhere. And I think you guys are both right on the money. More likely than not, I actually think there's a chance that Mantle's legend and status and his aura grows. Because even though my son, and maybe God willing, right, your daughter's kids and my son's kids one day, they wouldn't have seen Mantle play. They're actually another generation away. But guess what? Books are still going to be around. Stories will still be around. Video will, of course, still be around. And I just think that as long as there is still baseball, there will be Mickey Mantle.
What a bow to put on that discussion, Leighton. I love it. Thank you. And I'm sure we all agree with that. All right, let's move on and talk about some cards that we have picked up recently. I have I pulled out two that I'd love to share with everybody. And I know, Jonathan, you did too, and I don't know what it is, and I love that. But Leighton, let's start with you and a vintage O-Pee-Chee baseball collection. Why don't you tell us a story about that and a couple of the cards from that collection?
Sure. So briefly, I personally love vintage O-Pee-Chee baseball. At the last Toronto Expo I went to earlier this year, I was just laser focused on it. And I was amazed and shocked at how little there was. But I think just through sheer just desire and willingness to get some O-Pee-Chee baseball, I kept talking about it on podcasts. Guy at the bagel shop who doesn't even collect cards. I mean, anyone and everyone who would listen to me about vintage O-Pee-Chee baseball, I talked about it. And guess what happened? I literally just with the sheer desire of wanting to buy fresh O-Pee-Chee baseball, had someone from the Toronto Expo who had reached out and said, you know, hey, I heard you on either in a Spotlight or your own podcast, Leighton. Like, I have some of this O-Pee-Chee baseball. So fast forward, they meet me at the National. They come up to my booth, and it's a substantial group of 1965 O-Pee-Chee baseball PSA graded cards. It's a 1968 O-Pee-Chee baseball set, sans Nolan Ryan. And this is what's a kicker. We've never met before. So he could see, and Jonathan, as you alluded to, you were at my booth just a little bit. The National, not just my booth, was insanely busy. Jeremy, you were there. Very, very busy.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. I already had projects every night I was working on valuing another collection. The guy made it super easy for me. He said, I'll tell you what, take it back. I know who you are. I don't think you're going to disappear. Call me a few weeks after the National. And I'm like, is there a camera here? Like, really? Like, we don't know each other. Do you want me to, like, give you a deposit or something? He's like, no, if you don't work it out, you ship it back. Sure. So, candidly, it took a little bit longer than I would have liked because O-Pee-Chee baseball is not the easiest to value. It's not traded very often. So, without further ado, I'm just going to show you a few of the highlights. But you can imagine that not only is it difficult to find, but it's also hard to find in high grade. And these are cards he graded himself. So check this out. 1965 O-Pee-Chee Al Kaline PSA 8.
Wow.
And that's tough.
Wow.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's very tough.
Let's see here. We got a Ron Santo in a PSA 8.
Beautiful example.
There we go. Oh, there you see a little better.
Yeah.
And then just a leader card. I always dig these.
Oh, yeah.
Featuring Bob Gibson, Don Drysdale, Bob Veal, PSA 8. Not every card in the collection is graded an 8. But I'm really thrilled with them. We're able to work out a deal. And the last item I wanted to share, I bought this at a recent auction, and I'm going to quote Jonathan's now line, which I think I'm going to use often. This card will not be made available for sale at public auction in my lifetime. So it is a Christy Mathewson T206. It's an SGC1 with a little bit of course, you can see the damage there, but I didn't buy for that. Can you see that ghost image of his face? How cool is that?
Very cool. Wow. Yeah, that comes through really well.
Yeah, it looks even more interesting in person, if that makes any sense.
Amazing.
Love it.
And it's got a clean back. So I thought that was super cool. I love T206s. I love oddities. And there's just something about it. Like when it hits you seeing it in person, it's I don't know. I love it. And I think Crosby will like it one day too, but I'm going to take Jeremy's camp in this one. I'm not so sure, Jonathan, that I could go around telling my son all these cards will be his, because he's getting to the age where not only where he might take the cards, but he's already going to be starting to spend the money.
You're
you know, Dad, I can't drive for 7 years, but I have my eyes on a 69 Mustang. Like, what?
You're reminding me of when my kids were 7 or 9. I don't think I would have either. My daughter is now a very mature, almost 14, and she wears a shirt to school with the Mickey Mantle card on it that was made.
Oh, that's awesome.
Victory Investments. You guys might know him, Sean,
yes,
from Instagram, made the shirt. She wears it around. She's a huge fan and loves the card. So once they're a little bit older, you start to trust them more.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you just told us how old your daughter was, but when you said earlier that, you know, you told her that this card was hers, I thought to myself, well, she better be no older than 2 and no younger than about 15 years old. So it's anywhere in between, you're asking for big trouble. Thanks, Leighton. The pickups that I want to share, the first one happened at the Philly show. It was my first time out at the Philly show. And it was the first vintage card I had bought since acquiring my 1933 Babe Ruth, and in the PSA 1, the beautiful, beautiful copy. And after I picked up that particular card, I realized that, you know, every card I buy now is going to be measured up against that one in terms of how much I enjoy it. And I'm a big fan. I love the Jackie Robinson story. Who doesn't? But the unsung hero and all that to me is Pee Wee Reese, because if you watch the movie 42, there's that scene. I mentioned this a lot. I probably even have mentioned it on a Vintage Spotlight episode, but where they are playing, I believe it's in Cleveland, and they're out in the field, and Pee Wee Reese walks up at, you know, Jackie's being heckled. Pee Wee Reese walks up to him, puts his arm around him in the outfield, and looks up at the crowd as if to say, he's one of us now. So settle down, everybody. And to me, he was integral in the acceptance of Jackie and African-American players into Major League Baseball. So I'm a big fan of Pee Wee Reese for his inclusivity in the game of baseball. And I picked up at the Philly show this 1951 Bowman Pee Wee Reese. And when I first saw this card, I thought it's kind of a weird looking card with that really dark background, but it grew on me substantially to the point where I had to have it. And I just love the card. And it's, as I didn't cover up the grade, it's in an SGC 7.5. I don't really care about the condition of this card. I want it to be nice and have eye appeal. And I just love it. And this is, you know, as you might expect, this is not a break the bank card. This is well under $1,000 to purchase this card, and I couldn't be happier. And I get almost as much satisfaction and love of this for owning this card as I do with that Babe Ruth. I'm really, really happy with it. So that's my a personal pickup. And then just last weekend the weekend before last at the Van City Card Show, I picked up this Wayne Gretzky O-Pee-Chee rookie, and I'll cover the grade for a moment. I don't think you could have seen it yet, and I'll just put the spotlight here on myself so those watching can see, but there it is. A very nicely centered copy. The oil drop is well placed. And I will reveal the grade. It's a 2.
Oh,
wow.
But it's one of the nicest 2s I had seen. And the seller knew what he had. So I didn't get this card cheap. I had to pay for it. But I love when I can acquire a Gretzky rookie that I think is among the best out there for that grade. I love that value, that eye appeal value. And this card, I'm undecided if I'm going to keep it or if I'm going to put it in my showcase at the Toronto Expo here in a couple of weeks. I think it will end up coming with me and end up in the showcase, but it's just a beautiful card. And I thought, listen, I don't need to make a ton of money on it. I just want to find it a really good home. And I think I'll be able to, if I don't decide between now and then that home becomes my own home, which I'm prone to do at times, shopping from my own my own trader box or show inventory, if you will. So those are the 2 that I wanted to share, nice and quick. Jonathan, you have a pickup. You said to me, I think even before we started recording, that you think I'm going to like it. So I've been on pins and needles here for the last 45 minutes waiting to see this card. So what do you have?
Well, first of all, I need to react to that Gretzky. Beautiful example. I have 3 copies of that card across Topps and OPC, and I'm always looking for more. It's just one of those cards where when you see a gorgeous example, you can't resist. And even if it's not in your PC permanently, you get the joy of owning a nice example. That's a beautiful one. So Jeremy, I think I first came to know of you, I want to say 3 years ago, in somebody else's YouTube video. And it was at the Toronto Expo, and you were set up. And I was really impressed by your table, and I thought, this is the hockey card guy. That was my impression of you at the time. I just thought, wow, what an amazing hockey PC. And you were one of the people that inspired me to really start going after ice hockey. I grew up in Central Ohio. I'm a diehard fan of the Columbus Blue Jackets, which I tell people is character building. But I'm going to show you the second best hockey card in my PC after my Bobby Orr rookie. I bought this a little over 3 months ago, sent it to a vault where it waited for a while, and I just got it a couple weeks ago at home. And this is my Richard rookie. It's a gorgeous example. I mean, these 1951 Parkhurst cards usually have a lot of toning. Sometimes the image clarity is not great. But this one, it was so well centered. Love the color on it. It's a PSA 5 for me of this type of card is pretty high grade, but I just couldn't resist it. And I've had it up on the display shelf ever since I got it at home. It's just one of those ones where, I keep looking and thinking, wow, I can't believe I finally got that card. Haven't yet shared it on my Instagram page. I'm waiting for a good sunset to photograph it against, but it's a thrill to get to share it with you, Jeremy, given how I think of you in the hockey card community.
Well, okay, I got a few things to say. First of all, can we see the back really quick? Clean. Yeah, nice and clean. Okay, I love that card. The 51 Parkhurst is the first post-war set. It is chock filled with rookie cards and Hall of Fame rookies. And in my opinion, the Maurice Richard is, it's like 1A and 1B between Gordie Howe and Maurice Richard. I think the hobby would generally move towards Gordie Howe, but if you don't, I feel there's less familiarity with Maurice Richard, but he's an absolute legend. And he's a Mount Rushmore Montreal Canadian, which it says a lot because they have such a deep roster of historical players. And I love that card, Jonathan. First of all, the 2 things I noticed about it. Number one, I noticed that black background behind what would be the glass is nice and solid. Oftentimes that black can be faded. You can see, I'll zoom in on it again. You can see some snow effect. That looks to be solid black. Beautiful. The other thing, keep it up there for a second, because the other thing I want to mention, 51 Parkies were many of them are cut differently. I call that a full-bodied copy because of how wide those side borders are. Yeah, that is a full-bodied 1951 Parkey Maurice Richard. I own a copy. My personal copy is a PSA 4, also full-bodied, beautiful copy, and and I just love it. And I'm so glad that that's the card that you're showing me, because I think the Maurice Richard rookie needs to be appreciated a little bit more than it has been. And I don't mean values need to go up. I don't care. I mean, the hobby needs to understand how great of a card that is, how important of a player he was. There's a movie out there called The Rocket. I recommend people watch that movie. It's all he was known as Rocket Richard. Yep. His name is Maurice Richard. You'll hear people who don't know that refer to him as Maurice Richard, because that's fair. They just don't know, but it's Maurice Richard. And the Rocket Richard, his brother was Henri Richard, like Henry, but pronounced Henri Richard, known as the Pocket Rocket because he's a little bit smaller than his brother. And Henri Richard has 11 Stanley Cups. Maurice didn't last as long. He played a game of brute force. He could go toe-to-toe with Gordie Howe, who is known as Mr. Elbows. So as well as being known as Mr. Hockey, he was known as Mr. Elbow. So wonderful card, Jonathan. If you are listening to this on podcast, I highly recommend you go to the YouTube channel for Vintage Spotlight and have a look at all these cards that we have shown here tonight. Leighton, before we wrap up, why don't you give some feedback on all the cards that you just saw?
Well, I would like to buy them all. So, but I'm respectful enough to understand that that's not how this works. And really, Jonathan, let's just keep it real here. We were going to bring you in for like a small segment of the show. I'm easygoing. Jeremy's like, hey, maybe you'd like to be part of all of it. You were easygoing. I had a lot of fun. This doesn't feel, when Jeremy and I are doing the show, and I'm curious, Jonathan, if you feel the same when you're doing your podcast, this doesn't feel like work.
Totally agree. Yeah, this has been a blast. I could have talked for 3 times as long with you gentlemen. So maybe we'll do it again sometime. Yeah,
I would love to do it over some maybe beers at the Fall Toronto show.
Amen. I need to make it up there.
I'm trying to go up there myself. PSA is me grading. In fact, just to be clear, Jonathan, I wasn't going to go. So I told my buddy Justin Stuck on Pucks. I told Jeremy, I said, I went to the spring. I'll just go back for the spring. Like, it's all good. And then the birds started chirping. They're like, well, Leighton, the fall, the stuff is better. I'm like, what do you mean the stuff is better? Could there be even more O-Pee-Chee baseball? And of course, the guys I'm talking to are like, well, it's possible. So I'm working it out. I may not be able to go for long, but I think I'm going to try to go up on like a Wednesday. I'll leave on Friday at the end of the day. I just, beyond the cards themselves, I love the camaraderie. I love seeing Jeremy and Mark Juteau and long-haired Larry and Jason Martin. And I mean, really, it's like, it almost seems like it's a TV show with some of the names I'm throwing out there, but it's just, it's a wonderful time. I hope you're able to come up, Jonathan.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, I certainly hope you both can make it up. It is right around the corner. It's November 7th to 10th here. The Fall Expo in Toronto. It's a great show. I've been there for 20 years now. And if you are going to make it up, I want to just invite both of you and anyone else listening and watching. Thursday night of Toronto Expo, I host a networking event. It's 5 minutes from the venue, and you can just come see me at my booth, and I can give you more information, or follow my Instagram. It's at Jack Asters. It starts at 8 o'clock on Thursday the 7th after the show. 8 o'clock after the show ends for the day. And I'd love to have you and to have Leighton and Jonathan there that would be just awesome. And for any other vintage collectors, if you're coming to Toronto, you're invited to come to that. And the appetizers are being sponsored by Upper Deck, so there will be some nice finger food available at no cost, but feel free to come and have dinner. And I want to echo Leighton. This was great. It does not feel like work. It's the opposite. This is leisure. This is fun. This is enjoyable. Being able to hang out with friends with common interests and even common interests within the overall cardboard collecting interest makes it even that much better. And then to hear that, we've inspired something, or I've inspired something, or you've inspired something, Leighton, that is, you can't put a value on that. You can't, I just can't measure that. I can't articulate how that makes me feel. It's wonderful. So thank you for all that, guys. Jonathan, thanks again for joining us. This was great, guys. Make sure you're checking out the Rough Cuts podcast as well, and following Jonathan on Instagram, sportscards.and.sunsets. And I love that he's got to wait for the right sunset to get the right picture of that Maurice Richard rookie, Jonathan. You're not messing around. You take great pride in curating your Instagram page, and that's one of the things that I do love about following you and being friends with you in the hobby. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, guys. You're class acts.
All right, Leighton, this was a great episode. We'll be back again in the near future here. We'll get another episode out in the next couple of weeks, maybe after the Toronto Expo. Leighton, anything you'd like to mention before we end this?
No, I appreciate you joining us today, Jonathan. I hope everyone enjoyed today's content. And to second Jeremy's thought, if you're someone who's just found our podcast and you're enjoying it, I highly recommend to go to our YouTube channel, The Vintage Spotlight, because over the first several episodes of our show, we inevitably show off a handful of vintage cards every show. And as much as we're describing them to you, etc., there's nothing better than seeing them for yourself.
And with that, this episode of the Vintage Spotlight, episode number 6, is now over. Thank you, everybody, for joining.